Turning in your Bibles, Proverbs chapter 30. All right. Hey, Jack, when you turn these lights off up here, would you do something? Will you remember to pull the plug on this thing, on the baptistry? I need to drain that thing. And then get all the fish out of it. No, just kidding. Proverbs chapter 30. I'm going to put this down, go to this one. And if you are able, please stand with me if you would. Out of respect for the Word of God, we're going to begin reading in verse number 18. Proverbs chapter 30, verse number 18. My message last week was entitled, 2 things, 3 things, 4 things. Because there's all these lists in this particular chapter. Tonight's message is 4 more things. Because there's 3 more lists of 4 things in this chapter. Proverbs chapter number 30, and begin reading with me in verse number, I'll begin here in verse number 18. Bible says there are 3 things which are too wonderful for me, yea, 4 which I know not. In other words, I look at these things and I see them, but I don't understand them. And he lists them. The way of an eagle in the air. The way of a serpent upon a rock. The way of a ship in the midst of the sea. And the way of a man with a maid. And I'm going to leave off reading there. Father, bless the reading of your word. I pray you would use it for your honor and glory. I pray you speak to us through the Word of God tonight. Edify your people and teach us and help me, Father, to have wisdom to say what needs to be said and to have discernment myself that I might understand, that I might teach others in the way they should go. And I pray these things in thy name. Amen. Thank you. You may be seated. There's a list here of 4 things that are unsearchable. 4 things that are intolerable, 4 things that are little and wise, and 4 things that are stately. And I don't know how many of those I'm going to get to tonight, but I'm going to get to as many of them as I can. We read this passage here in verse number 18. There are 3 things which are too wonderful for me. Yea, 4 which I know not. He's saying, I can't comprehend. I see something and it's wonderful. I see something and it's glorious, but I really can't understand it. I don't know how it happens. And he mentions the eagle in the air. One thing I love about living here, right on the Mississippi River, is all them bald eagles in the wintertime. That, and it's not 100 degrees. See, here's the thing. I prefer cold weather over warm weather. And I grew up in Texas. That's why I prefer cold weather over warm weather. You know, the thing is, my snowboaters are shaking their heads back here because they're about to head to Texas here in a few weeks, and they don't want to stick around for the cold. And I get it. I understand. But the amazing thing to watch those eagles fly. I like it in cold. The reason I like it in cold, because if it's cold, you can put on more clothes. And if it gets too hot, there's only so much you can righteously take off. And some of them have taken off more than is righteous. So the thing I like about that time of year is everybody puts their clothes back on. Anyway, I digress. You watch those eagles, it's amazing. What's amazing about it is you see them soaring. You see them soaring in the sky, but you don't see them flap their wings. You see them get up. When they get up in the air, and they'll hang there for hours on end and never flap their wings. And that's amazing. Why is that? How is that? You talk about a snake. Now, he mentions a snake on a rock. Now, a snake can crawl across a rock and you don't see anything. You see that snake move, but you're amazed at how he doesn't have legs. He just moves across that rock. That's how Mexico, the man who discovered what is now Mexico way back, the Spanish explorers, when he claimed the property for the Queen of Spain, he saw a snake on a rock and knew this was the place. How he knew that, I don't know, but it's Mexico. And they've got a lot of rocks down there and a lot of snakes. I don't know how he wouldn't have seen a snake on a rock in Mexico. That's about all I ever saw in Mexico. I've been to Mexico twice. How many? No, I've been to Mexico once. Twice. I've been to Mexico twice, and all I saw was rocks and snakes. So I don't know how you would have not missed that. But how they move, how does that snake move? And another thing that's amazing, when a snake will do this, he'll crawl out onto a rock. Now, snakes don't like it hot either. They like to stay in there where it's cold and cool, and they don't like being out in the heat. But they get out on a rock, and a snake's skin does not grow. He will grow a subdermal skin. And as he grows, the outer skin, he'll crawl out on the rock, and all of a sudden that outer skin will die, and it'll just peel away. And all of a sudden, he's got a brand new skin. And they do that throughout their lives. There have been times when you can go down in West Texas, where my wife is from, and you can go out in the desert where they got rattlesnakes. You can go out in the desert where they've got rattlesnakes. And when you do, you tell me how it was, because I won't be with you. But you can go out there and you can find rattlesnake skins. Now, if you kill a rattlesnake and get the skin that's alive, they make great boots. Just saying. So is that in your sermon notes? No, that's just something I know. But how amazing is it that they just shed that old skin and grow out of it? They grow out of their old skin. Well, that's pretty fascinating. The third thing he mentions is a ship in the sea. Another thing that's fascinating is that somebody said, we are in the world, but we are not of the world. I'll say more about that here in a minute. But that ship goes cutting through the ocean, and you really can't now, you understand, they only had sailing ships back then. Did you hear about the new scientific breakthrough they came up with? Wind-powered cruisers, wind-powered ships. It's a brand new concept, wind-powered ships. We used to call them sailboats when I was a boy. All of a sudden, these Greenpeacers think they've got a bright idea, and they've been using it for 5,000 years. We've had sails on ships. Moron. Anyway, I digress. But it's so amazing. They move without effort. And James uses this as an illustration, but he says that with a very small helm, they have a great ship, and yet it's turned about by a very small helm. And he uses that to talk about the tongue. over in the book of James. So you have three things here. And these three things here are so amazing because one of them seems to fly and move without it. All three of these things take a course that you cannot see. They're not on a road. They're not on a path. That eagle is not on a path. Now, he's on a current. He's on a current of air. We know scientifically how this works now. He glides on a current of air. The snake glides on the current from his own belly. The ship courses through the water, being carried by the wind and by the waves, mainly being carried by the wind. You can't see a road, you can't see a course, and yet they move, they fly, they float. And it's amazing. They grow, they are alive, and they have life in them and direction, and it's amazing. The fourth one is a man with a maid. And he is referring to the courtship, the relationship, and how it grows and how it moves. You see, that relationship takes a course too that you can't necessarily see. How in the world, you ever look at a couple and say, how in the world did they get together? You know, I see marriages, and I thought, these people were made for each other. You can just tell. How can you tell that? Well, let me tell you something about relationships that's interesting. In light of these, you see, a relationship of a man with a maid is a little bit like, there's some similarities here. And many times, the relationship rises on a current of turbulence. A lot of times it's the turbulence that lifts us up in as we cling together. I think about my marriage, and I think about what we've been through and everything. And the wind can blow things over that are sedentary, but things that have life and things that have direction can move on that wind. And I can tell you, there have been times that my wife and I learned how to take those turbulence that we were flying through and get higher. I remember performing a funeral for a dear, sweet church member at All Seasons Baptist Church, Jan Pickens. And Jan was not that old, but she got sick and she got pancreatitis and got complications, and she was up at the hospital in Clinton, and there was a blizzard and they couldn't get her to Iowa City, and they managed to get her to Iowa City, but really it was too late and she didn't make it. Jan and Walt had been through a lot of turbulence, and they'd been through turbulence together, but together it lifted them up. That's the way it's supposed to be in that kind of relationship. You see, you rise together in the turbulence. When we stood by the graveside, I really wish I had been looking up. I was looking around, I was watching the people, and I was looking at my Bible, and I had my head bowed praying, and I was looking around. I never looked up. Really wish I had. Walt looked up. And the whole time we were there at the cemetery, cold, snow-covered ground, cold wind. We prayed, and I went back. I said my goodbyes, and we went back to the car, and my wife was in the car, and I was getting in the car, and Walt Pickens came up to me, and he said, "Did you see that? Did you?" I said, "Did I see what?" He said, "Did you see that?" I said, "No." He said, "You know what?" He said, "The entire time you were speaking, there was a bald eagle circling us. And as you spoke and as you prayed, it got higher and higher and higher." And I smiled, and he said, "And they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." It's the turbulence that he flies on. You see, if a bird is coasting to a stop, if he's just coasting to a stop, he'll turn away from the wind. If he's just up there fluttering, playing around, he'll turn away from the wind. But whenever he wants to go higher, any bird will do this. Any bird that wants to go higher, they turn into the wind. Isn't that amazing? They turn into the wind. Did you know that bald eagles are monogamous? Studied a lot about bald eagles. We've had, I think there's still a pair of bald eagles out here, out there between Arconic and the river. There's a stand where there's a big eagle's nest. And last year they had 2 baby eaglets out there. I haven't heard much about them lately, but technically they're here year-round. It's just in the winter they migrate down from up north where the river freezes over so that they can fish here. But isn't it amazing? You ever been on a ship in the middle of the ocean? I have. On the tail of, you've been in helicopters. What do you, he'd rather be in a helicopter than on a ship. Something's wrong. Y'all pray for him. There's something wrong with him. He'd rather be in a chopper. You and Charlie, man. You and Charlie. I got all these helicopter people in my church. Anyway, you ever watched, we're talking about a snake. You ever seen a snake peel its skin off? You know what the sign of? That's a sign of growth. How is a man and a maid like that? How is any relationship? And I could broaden this. I could say this goes to other relationships as well, friendships as well as, but primarily we're talking about a relationship between a man and a woman. You know who I would not want to be married to right now? My wife at 20 years old. I wouldn't want to be married to a 20-year-old, even a 20-year-old her right now. I knew a man, he got married when he was 21, he got married when he was 45, and he got married when he was 60. All 3 times he married a woman that was 21. 60 years old, married to a 21-year-old. That's a little out of the range for me. Say, why? What do you mean? You wouldn't want to be? I wouldn't want to be married to that 20-year-old girl that I married. I don't want to be married to her. I want to be married to her. I want to be married to the woman that's got 42 years experience being married. I want to be with the one. You know what happens when that snake peels its skin off? It means it's growing. It means it's changing. I don't understand somebody that tells me, I've had a few men say this to me. I've never had a woman say this to me. I've had a few men say this to me. Well, she's just not the woman that I married 10 years ago. Well, good night. I hope not. I hope she's matured a little bit. Maybe you're the one that needs to grow up a little bit. Maybe you're the one that needs to, maybe she outgrew you. Look, as we grow in our relationships, we grow together. as we grow in our spiritual relationship, let me use this as an illustration. I was speaking to a young lady, and I was explaining to her about the progress of a relationship. And if you get the progress out of order, there is an order by which you are supposed to get to know one another. First thing you do is you get to know one another intellectually. You get to know one another intellectually. You know, you get to know what your taste is in food. What kind of food you like? Where do you like to live? You like warm weather, cold weather? You like, you like the Chiefs or the Packers? You know, you learn those things. You know, your politics. You know, whether you're a conservative, a liberal, or a libertarian. You know what? You get to know their politics. And then you get to know one another spiritually. What is your faith? Say, shouldn't you go with that first? No. I mean, I'm going to find out if somebody's a born-again Christian before I would ever get in a relationship. She would not go out with a guy who was not. She had surrendered her life to full-time service before she met me. And she said, "No, I'm not gonna date him." And the little gaggle of hens that she ran around with, I got to know all those girls. Man, I kept them at arm's length. They were a crowd. I'm here to tell you, they were dangerous. And I had Sunday school teachers kept trying to hook me up with, some of them, and I'm like, yeah, no. No, thank you. But she plays the piano. Yeah, she plays the field too, and I have a problem with that. But anyway, I digress. She said, no, I'm not going to, he's not surrendered to full-time service. Well, guess what happened 2 weeks after she met me? I surrendered to full-time service. I just got saved. She wouldn't have given me a second look otherwise. You see, we got to know one another intellectually first. I mean, the thing about being a born-again Christian is a deal breaker. You either are or you're not. But beyond that, you get to know them intellectually. You get to know them spiritually. I mean, you get to learn what kind of spiritual life they have. You learn if they're battling with sin habits. You learn if they're struggling in certain areas. You learn what their doctrinal position is on things. I was very interested in a young lady I met in college, and she was a good girl. She was a nice girl, good girl, beautiful girl. And we got to know one another on that intellectual level, and then we got to know one another on that spiritual level and realized we had some serious differences. She is a born-again Christian, absolutely. Her dad was an Assembly of God preacher. Matter of fact, her dad, before he fell, not before her dad fell, but her dad had at one point worked for Jimmy Swaggart before he went sideways. And then her dad dumped him like a cold fish. Her dad is a man of great honor and integrity, and I loved him, loved her. I loved her parents. Loved her parents, but I'm going to tell you something. This old IBF guy, this independent fundamental Baptist guy up here, was not going to make it in a good relationship with an Assembly of God girl. Wasn't going to happen. And we parted company. Get to know one another on that on that intellectual, then spiritual, then the emotional level. You get to know those deep feelings and those heart. You get to know what's going on in the heart and those emotions. And then after marriage, then it gets physical. And get to know one another physically after marriage. Now, do you see what the problem is in culture today? That's completely backwards. It starts with the physical. And if it starts with the physical, it will end badly. It will end badly if it starts with the physical, because then what happens is you get into a physical relationship with somebody and get married or move in together or something. You want to live together first in order to know whether or not you're compatible, right? Right? It doesn't. I mean, that's logical. You want to live together first. That's why half the people who live together break up before they get married. That's also why people who live together before they get married, the divorce rate is 85%. What happened to getting to know? What did you not get to know during that time? Well, it was all about disregarding the intellectual, disregarded the spiritual, disregarded the emotional, went straight to the physical, and ruined the relationship. The way of a man with a maid. It can soar or it can crash. It's something that takes flight in turbulence. It's something that rises to the occasion. It's something that grows. Maybe even out of something that died, it grows. And certain things, as they grow together, are shed and put off and put aside. We put away. I have learned, I was young and now I am old, and there's a whole lot less that matters now than 30 years ago. Not as much. There are not as many things that are important now as when I was 30. But the things that are important now are much more important than they were when I was 30. That's called growth. We grow out of pain. We grow out of things. I outgrew some things. We've outgrown some things together. And in doing so, we've grown together. My favorite activity in the world is to pack up the car, put her in it, and go away. And just drive. And just go places and go on trips together and just enjoy hours of just sitting there driving, looking at the road in front of us and just talking to one another. You see, you may not be able to see the path that a ship is taking, but there's one person that knows. I read a story this week about a captain of a steamer ship. This was in 1899. He was crossing the Atlantic Ocean, and he got to looking at the charts, and he got to looking at weather, and it was late into the night, and he gets to looking at the stars, and he's looking at his charts. And he turns to his first mate and he says, "Do you realize where we are?" He said, "Yes, Captain. We're only a few miles from where the date line crosses the equator." And he said, "Get the navigators up here." And he called on, middle of the night, he calls the navigators up, and they navigated the ship into position, and they turned to a heading that was south by south. They were headed east. They turned the bearings south by southeast. He charted it out. He killed the engines, and he came to a stop at a certain place, and he moved his ship into position. And at midnight, December 31st, 1899, he pulled his ship across the intersection of the international date line and the equator at the same time. His ship, the fore section of his ship and the aft section of his ship were in 2 different days, 2 different months, 2 different years, 2 different centuries, 2 different seasons, because, it's summer in the north, winter in the north, summer in the south. All at the same time. So how did he do that? He was a captain that knew how to guide the ship. You know how we've guided this ship for 42 years? We've had, you can look at marriages that work, and you may not be able to look at them and spot it. But there's a direction. If a relationship does not have a direction, it's not a healthy relationship. And if you're going in that same direction, you may not be, other people looking on may not be able to see it. But there's somebody guiding that relationship. We have worked, and I have not always succeeded. Have I ever gotten off course? A couple of times. I've gotten off course a couple of times. You know why? I didn't check with my navigator. When I got off course, it was because I didn't check with my navigator. I was in Navy ROTC in high school, and we learned what was called dead reckoning, how you look at the sun, you can look at the moon, you can look at the stars, you can look at the horizon, and you can plot. You can, with pencil, paper, and sextant, you can plot the course and your position, and you plot your course here, and then here, and then here, and you can find your bearings, and then your course. Bearings is the direction you're headed. Course is what you're headed toward. Your bearings and your course and your heading. There's 3 different things. I'm not going to get into all that because it'll kill the illustration. But your bearings and your headings and your course, all of that comes to play. And it's amazing to watch a ship at sea. It's also amazing to watch a relationship when it's being headed in the right course. Say, why do they have such a wonderful marriage? Because they're heading on the same course. Why does that church, let me take it a step further. Church is the bride of Christ. Why are some churches just seem like they're on the right course and God's blessing and they're prosperous? Why is it that God is working because they're on the right course? And the bride is attentive to the groom. These things are too wonderful for me. You say there's certain things, preacher, that you haven't explained that I don't understand. Yeah, it's because there's a lot of it I don't understand. But I know the one that does. And I don't necessarily know always what the right course is. So I have to stay real close to the navigator. Stay real close to that. There are 4 things that are amazing. 4 things that are unsearchable. The way of an eagle in the sky, the way of a snake on a rock, the way of a ship in the ocean, the way of a man with a woman. Matthew Henry said, "The kingdom of nature is full of wonders, marvelous things which God of nature does that are past finding out." And the wonderful thing is, we talk about trusting God with all the trials. How about, do you trust God with the joys? Do you trust God with the prosperity? You know, good times are more dangerous than hard times. You think about it. Good times are more dangerous than hard times. Joseph faced a real challenge when his brothers sold him into slavery. and he rose to the top. And then when he faced the challenge when he was lied about and got thrown in prison, and he rose to the top. And then he was made prime minister in Egypt, and only person that he answered to was Pharaoh himself. And the Bible says Pharaoh didn't even know Pharaoh didn't know what his accounts were, because Joseph was his accountant and he trusted him that much. He was prime minister. He became the most powerful man. That's when it got dangerous. That's when he could have had taken vengeance on his brothers. And the nation of Israel would have been lost had he done that. How does God do so many amazing things? They are unsearchable. So just like by faith we trust God with the difficult times, we trust God that he has done these amazing things, and I can just sit back and I can just marvel at it. You know, you don't have to understand it to marvel at what God's done. It's unsearchable. The Bible says to know the unsearchable riches of his word. That's unsearchable. That's all, Stan. I got to quit. Heads bowed and eyes closed. Say, preacher, God's dealing in my heart about some things tonight. It may not have been directly related to the message, but you say, God's dealing with me about some things tonight. Pray for me. Just slip your hand up and say, preacher, pray for me.